Welcome back to this vlog. I am now 7 weeks out. Today I want to discuss a few things, including how to handle getting sick during training, how to modify training as you get closer to show day or contest prep day, rate of weight loss during contest prep, and finally my personal plans to curb hunger and finish this contest prep strong in terms of weight loss. So first up, I wanted to discuss how to handle getting sick in relation to training, cutting, and so forth. Now, for some background, I recently got a cold, as you may or may not be able to hear. That's why my voice sounds a bit off today, and why I might not be as high energy as usual, even though I'm apparently very rarely high energy, especially during prep. So how do you handle getting sick during prep? During prep specifically, you are a bit more likely to get sick and get ill. It's a pretty common thing for people to get sick as they get closer and closer to show day, because as you're in deficit, as you have low calorie intakes, as you're leaner, etc., you're just a bit more likely to get sick. And most people get sick more often during winter and fall or autumn than they do during spring and summer. And so generally speaking, if you can avoid doing really big cuts during autumn or winter, that's probably a good idea. But then again, during contest prep, you don't always have that luxury. So in my case, for example, my show is taking place on the 31st of October, and so I don't really have a choice when to cut. I sort of have to cut in fall. And so besides just making sure you don't cut for too long and don't really elevate your own risk of getting sick, what can you do once you actually get sick? Well, it depends on how sick you get and what sort of sickness you have. In my case right now, I have a bit of a cold. It's nothing too major. It's enough to make me sleep a bit worse and to sort of make me feel out of breath a little bit at times, but not much else. And I think a good rule of thumb, and this isn't medical advice or anything, but a good rule of thumb is usually that if you don't feel super rough and your performance isn't being impaired by being sick, so for example, you go train and your performance is just as good as usual, it's essentially the same, and you don't feel super rough, I don't really think you need to modify your training all that much. However, the more it impairs your performance and or the more rough you feel, the more you should consider making modifications to your training and or diet. For example, let's say your performance is impaired and you feel quite rough. In that case, it might just be best for you to take a maintenance week, or even just take time off entirely, depending on just how rough you feel, etc. But depending on the severity of your illness, various adjustments can be appropriate and justified. In my case, because I only have a small cold, no real adjustment necessary, although if it does get much worse, it might be a matter of me taking my deload week a bit earlier. I was planning on deloading not this upcoming week, but the week afterwards. And if this cold gets much worse, then it might be a good idea for me to take a deload a week early and just extend my next men's cycle by a week, which would work out just fine too, but that really depends on how sick I get, so we shall see. Next, I want to discuss how to modify training as you get closer and closer to show day. Now, just as I just discussed how your immune system gets a bit worse and weaker as you get closer to show day because you get leaner, you have consistently low energy intakes, potentially some micronutrient deficiencies and so forth. Overall, your immune system just isn't as robust during prep as it would be otherwise. The same applies to injury, but also to just how likely you are to get injured. So as you get closer and closer to show day, I think it behooves you to switch more of your training towards the higher rep ranges, and also switch more of your training towards the machine and less unstable work. So for example, I had the option between doing deficit sumo deadlifts, which are quite fatiguing and have likely a decent injury risk based on when you look at how often strongman and powerlifters get injured. They get injured a fair amount compared to bodybuilders. I'm not saying that's strong evidence in favor of deadlifts being injurious, but you see a lot of injuries in lower back specifically, and so it wouldn't be a stretch to say that deadlifts probably are fairly injurious, at least compared to something like split squats. And so in my case, because I'm getting closer and closer to show day, and my risk of injury is likely a bit elevated, it probably makes sense to get more of my glute stimulus from stuff like split squats, especially on a Smith machine, or on something quite stable where I can just re-rack the weight easily, than on something like sumo deadlifts, which are likely a bit more injurious and anecdotally just kick the shit out of me. So I would rather do more of my volume from split squats into high rep ranges. Next, I wanted to discuss rate of weight loss during contest prep. So generally speaking, during weight loss, you want to aim for around 0.5 to 1% of body weight loss per week. 0.5% is more appropriate if you're more prone to muscle loss and or have a harder time dieting. So that might be because you have poor genetics for muscle mass, because you're highly stressed, because you have poor sleep, because you're not on PEDs, a variety of reasons that can cause you to be a bit more prone to muscle loss. And you having a harder time with dieting can also be due to a variety of reasons. One of them would be you've spent a lot of time cutting in the past, and so you have a lot of diet fatigue, and in which case doing a quick cut can be quite difficult. It can require a really low calorie intake, it can make you a lot hungrier than you would otherwise be, and overall it might not just be sustainable or feasible. And so if you're prone to muscle loss and or you're not in a good position to be dieting, you probably should stick to that bottom end of that range, so more towards 0.5% of body weight per week. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're pretty fat, so high in body fat, you have good genetics, you're using PEDs, good sleep, low stress, and so forth, in that case, it might behoove you to go more towards the 1% of body weight loss per week. In fact, you can probably go even above that, and you can also go below 0.5, but I think for most people, most of the time, that range serves you pretty well. And so, if you have good genetics and so forth, 1% can work. And also, if you're in a good position to be dieting, if you find dieting to be pretty easy, if you haven't dieted in a while, and by dieting, I mean diet for weight loss, in those situations, it can make sense for you to lose quite quickly. And so, how does this apply to contest prep? At the beginning of contest prep, hopefully, if you did things properly, you should be in a pretty good position to be retaining muscle mass, to be dieting, and so forth. In my case, I was a bit fatter than I should have been. I was maybe around 20% body fat-ish, which is probably a bit too fat to be starting contest prep at, but hey, first time competing, we all make mistakes, let's just say that. So, in my case, because I was pretty fat, I had pretty good sleep, low stress, I was just beginning a diet, I hadn't really cut that much in the past few years. To be frank, I'd gained around 30 kilograms in the space of 3 or 4 years total, so that's around 65 pounds. A fair amount of fat, but also a lot of muscle. So I was in a good position to be dieting, and it wasn't going to be particularly hard at first, and so I could afford to go quite quickly. But then, as contest prep progressed, and diet fatigue set in, and I got leaner and leaner, and at times stress got higher, and right now, for example, sleep is worse, and stuff like that, the rate of weight loss is naturally going to slow down. Not naturally, but it should slow down, because as you get leaner and leaner, as your propensity to lose muscle mass increases and grows, you probably should slow down the rate of weight loss. And so, in my case right now, while I'm still aiming around 0.75% of body weight loss a week, it's definitely slowed down compared to the beginning. And so I think that's appropriate, and I think for most people, starting a contest prep by cutting pretty quickly, and then slowly reducing rate of weight loss until you reach show day is a good idea. Anecdotally, I feel pretty garbage right now, and so trying to cut really quickly now just wouldn't work. And this goes back to the whole thing with, are you in a good position to be dieting hard? At this point, I am not in a good position to be dieting super hard. I would lose muscle mass, I would struggle hunger-wise, energy-wise, everything. And so right now, a slow rate of weight loss makes sense. Note that some of the factors that make you better or worse at quick or slow weight loss are essentially unchangeable and fixed, like for example your genetics for how well you retain or gain muscle mass, those don't really change over time. But then other factors like how much diet fatigue you have, how good of a position you're in to be dieting in the first place, those factors do change. And so if you want to have a successful diet phase, I think paying attention to those factors can make sense. And it's something I routinely pay attention to when coaching clients. I ask them about the diet history, I ask them what they've been doing for the past few months, past few years, etc. Whether they started out being a bit overweight or more skinny and so forth. And all of that can paint a pretty good picture of how quickly should they lose weight? Should they lose weight? Are they ready to lose weight? And so forth. And just establishing those things early on can make the subsequent cut a lot more smooth. Alright, next up, I want to discuss my personal plans to curb hunger, stay active, and finish this contest prep strong. Now, I've discussed this a fair amount on social media, but I'm getting quite tired. I'm reaching the end of contest prep. I'm now 6 weeks out, or 43 days out to be precise, and stuff sucks. I pretty much just feel like sitting down and eating food, and that doesn't get you shredded. So I'm having to force myself to not eat food and to actually move around and not sit down. And so for these last 6 weeks, I'm going to do my best to keep it up. I think I can do it, but it's definitely going to be hard. And by comparison to other sports I've done, like basketball, football, etc., bodybuilding is, chronically speaking, the hardest. Anyways, back to my strategies. There's two things I'm going to do going forwards, starting this week. One is I'm going to start having 0-calorie foods. There's a type of noodle called, I believe, shirataki noodle, which is a noodle made from a certain root, which has very low calories. They're expensive, but I've purchased them, and that should help fill me out a little bit with meals. And it's sort of a last resort for these last 6 weeks. The second thing is using nicotine gum during the last phase of this prep. I'll be using nicotine gum for the whole month of October for around 4 weeks until I hit the stage. Those two things combined should hopefully be good enough to see me really reach the contest, the stage, ready to compete. Anyways, in the video now, you can see me do some posing, albeit very shakily because I was tired. But yeah, fun fact, my gym does not allow people to be shirtless. And so, this is about as good as it gets, unfortunately. Unless I sneak in some pics unbeknownst to the managers. But, this is about it. And yeah, the third thing I'm going to do to hopefully help a little bit is switch a few more of my carb sources from higher GI, higher glycemic index, and lower fiber. So namely cereal, to more higher fiber, less calorie dense carb sources. So I'm switching from cereal to sandwiches, for example. So from cornflakes with sugar to wholemeal bread, which has a lot lower of a GI, a lot more fiber, and so hopefully, and a lot more volume overall, less calorie dense. And so hopefully that switch should help with satiety as well. And so I can finish this contest prep strong and hopefully, stage lean. That's the aim. Anyways, that wraps up this video. If you enjoyed it, as always, please comment, like, subscribe. There's new videos coming out every Monday and Thursday now. And maybe a third video some weeks. We'll see. But anyways, if you enjoyed the video, please comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you again in the next one.